Welcome, dear listener, to Night Drive Paranormal. Every 2 weeks I bring you stories that have been sent to me from listeners of my main show, The Tape Library. Please keep in mind that whatever you may personally believe, the people who submitted these stories all claim that these events really happened. Feel free to discuss any theories or questions in the comments below, but please do bear in mind that they may be read by the witnesses themselves. Tonight I've got 5 true paranormal tales to tell you while we take a little drive together, which I think personally contains some of the creepiest stories I've been submitted so far. This is a very ghost-centric one, but we've also got a tale involving, well, I'm not sure what exactly, but something different. First up, we are headed to what seems to be a haunted fire station in the south of Wales. So, let's get into our first story, shall we? Back in 2015, I was working as a security officer on a fire station in South Wales. Unfortunately, I can't name it as it's still in use. My very first shift there was a Saturday morning. I arrived half an hour or so before my shift started, so that my colleague who had worked the night shift prior could show me around. I did the handover with him and settled into my shift. I should point out here that this fire station, at this time, was a retained station, meaning that the firefighters were not stationed there like a full-time station, but were called in for a shout by the means of an alerter or a pager. We, the security staff, were stationed on the first floor in the mess room. Around an hour into my shift, I heard the main door slam and footsteps on the stairs. One of the firefighters had come into the station to collect some belongings. His words when he saw me were, "Alright mate, you're one of the security guards, aren't you? Have you seen the ghosts yet?" I just laughed and had a quick conversation with him, dismissing his comments about the ghosts, as I knew only too well that firefighters have a reputation for pranks. He soon left the station and I settled back down to my duties. A short while later, another firefighter came to the station. Coming into the mess, he saw me and said, "Hi mate, security, yeah? Have you seen the ghosts yet?" My response was, to myself, this has to be a joke and they're all in on it. I just replied jokingly, "Yes mate, have you got the number for the Ghostbusters?" His reply shook me. Without even a flicker of a smile, he replied, "No mate, this place is bloody haunted." He did what he had to do and left, leaving me pondering his reply even though I was on my toes for a prank. Something told me there was an element of truth in what I was being told. I tried to put it to the back of my mind, but when I was carrying out a patrol, I saw, from a first floor window, a car pull onto the forecourt. A man wearing a white shirt with black epaulets with white pips on, indicating he held a high rank, got out and walked to the station. Immediately I thought to myself, I am going to get some answers. I ran down the stairs, meeting him outside the watchroom. Exactly the same as the others, his response to seeing me was the same, including asking if I had seen the ghosts. I then asked him outright if this was true, not some joke to wind up the security staff. His response was, "This station is haunted to buggery, mate. If I didn't have to be somewhere, I'd stay and tell you. But yeah, this place is haunted. You'll soon find out." I was taken aback by this, but I let him carry on with what he had to do, and carried on with my patrol at the station. Towards late afternoon, early evening, the first firefighter I had met that day arrived back at the station. I saw him arrive from a first floor window. I was determined now to get some answers, so I went into the mess room and put the kettle on. As he walked into the room, I offered him a cup of tea. He accepted my offer once he had done what he had to do. When we were both sat around the table, I asked him what had been happening. Please bear in mind these events had happened over a number of years. But this is what he told me. In 1878, on the site of the now fire station, stood a colliery. On September 11th, an explosion ripped through the mine, trapping 325 men and boys below the ground. Despite a valiant effort by the rescue team, 268 men and boys were killed or trapped in parts of the mine by the explosion. With fear of more explosions, the local government and the mine management diverted water from the local canal, flooding the pit. When they began salvage work to reopen the pit in 1882, bodies and parts of bodies were found scattered throughout the mine. It is believed that many of the miners were trapped and not killed by the explosion, but dying from drowning. The fire station now stands on the site of the old pithead. The station was once full-time and then went to a day manning system, where Monday to Friday it was manned between 9 AM and 6 PM, and after these hours and on the weekend it was retained. A new firefighter started there when it was day manning. He travelled from Swansea, a fair distance away. To save travelling back and forth every day, he sought permission from the senior officers to sleep in the station between his duties. They agreed and gave him a bed, one of the disused offices. On his first night staying there, he went to bed around 10 PM and fell asleep. During the night, he heard knocking on the office door. He called out, "Come in," thinking a fellow firefighter had returned to the station. But no one came through the door. He shrugged, thinking it was a dream, but a couple of minutes later, more knocking came from the office door. He leapt out of bed, throwing open the door, finding the corridor empty. He threw on some clothes and searched the entire station, but he found no one else there. Returning to the office, he was thinking to himself that it must have all been a very vivid dream. He had just closed the door when more knocking came from the other side. He opened it again rather angrily and found nothing. Not wasting any more time, he grabbed his belongings and bedding, spending the rest of the night in his car. After this incident, he bought a camper van while stationed here, vowing never to spend another night in the station again. Years after this, the station became retained. One afternoon, a senior officer had come into the station to do some paperwork. He was in the watchroom, and hearing a squeal of tyres, he looked through the window into the rear yard and saw a fellow firefighter getting out of his car with his wife. Both were having a blazing row. The senior officer, not wishing to be involved in the domestic, carried on with his work. Suddenly, he heard a scream coming from the rear yard. Thinking the other firefighter had attacked his wife, he ran out into the yard to find the wife sobbing hysterically on the floor, her husband trying to comfort her, but looking confused as he had no idea what had caused this. They brought her, still sobbing, into the watchroom, and after calming her down they asked her what had happened to cause her to go into hysterics. She told them that as she and her husband were arguing, she looked past him up into one of the first floor windows, where she saw the shape of a head there, which suddenly just vanished. Both men checked the whole station, finding no one else in there. The firefighter continued telling me about the hauntings. In the middle of the night, the crew on call had been alerted to a call and raced to the station, where they found all the lights on right through the building and the doors open, again with no one in the building. With most retained stations, after a call, the crew will gather in the station to have a cup of tea and a chat, but at this station at night, the crews just get back and go home. None of them will stay in the station after dark any longer than they have to. When there is an adverse weather conditions forecast, i.e. heavy ice or snow, the on-call crew will be called by fire control at home and requested to head to the station to answer any calls. The reason being is to save any of them from crashing en route to the station. They will all be sleeping in the same room when they hear doors slamming elsewhere in the station, and then they will all be arguing as to who should go and investigate the noises. However, none of them ever will. This struck me as strange, as firefighters are willing to run into burning buildings to save people, yet they will not go around their own station at night. I do have a deep interest in the paranormal, and I listened to him intently. When my colleague came back in that night, I told him everything, but he played it all down and said flatly that ghosts do not exist, and that it was all a joke. A few days later I arrived around 6:30 AM for my 7 AM start. My colleague was stood outside the front door of the station. I hadn't even switched the engine off on my car. He had my door open saying something had happened. He was talking rapidly. So much so I had to ask him to slow down so I could understand what he was saying. Sometime during the small hours he was looking out the window behind him, and he saw 3 figures, looking like miners, walking across the room. This was followed by several doors banging through the station. I said to him that I thought he didn't believe in ghosts. His reply was that he had strongly changed his mind after that night duty. On another duty, I was upstairs in the mess room. I finished a cup of coffee and conducted a patrol of the station. I was shocked to find all the lights on in the appliance bay, and all the doors to the appliances were wide open. I knew the lights were off and the appliance doors were closed from my previous patrol an hour or so previously. Another occasion I was conducting a patrol on the ground floor, and I heard doors being slammed upstairs. Again I ran upstairs, finding nothing. I was speaking to a friend of mine one afternoon on the phone. He too holds an interest in the paranormal, and I was explaining to him everything I had been told and everything that I had experienced at the station. During this conversation with him I saw, out of the corner of my eye, a figure walking towards the door. I spun around immediately, finding the room empty. Working there was definitely an experience that I'll never forget. Thank you to Dorian for sending that one in. Don't forget, if you have a paranormal experience you would like to share, then you can drop me an email at thetapelibrary@protonmail.com. Please include as much information as you can and let me know what name you would like to be credited as. I will be trying to feature as many of these stories I receive as possible, so if you want to be included in one of these late night drives, then please do get in touch. This next story is quite a simple one, but I don't know, I got chills reading it for the first time for some reason. Story number 2. This was an encounter I had roughly 2 years ago. I've always been able to see, hear and talk to things that weren't from this world. I dabble quite a bit in tarot card readings and dream interpretations. I was hit by COVID-19 during its peak in October 2021. When I recovered, I went back to living with my then boyfriend for the entirety of 2022. This was when things took a strange turn for me and the rest of the apartment tenants. Our apartment building was just comprised of 2 floors, but each floor had 5 rooms. My then boyfriend and I often went out to eat, as the apartment didn't have a kitchen or kitchen area, and cooking was prohibited. One day while talking and heading to our room on the 2nd floor, I noticed a woman standing by the staircase. She was looking down, her hair a medium length, wearing a long sleeve shirt and a long skirt with it. I greeted her with a good afternoon before continuing to talk to my then boyfriend about a game we were playing. For a while none of us noticed anything. None of us felt anything was off, until one of our neighbours invited each tenant on the 2nd floor for a beach party. While we were discussing things with all of the tenants, our friendly neighbour looked at 2 girls who lived together and said, "You guys should bring with you the other girl that lives with you along too." We all agreed. All of us except the 2 girls, looking at us confused. "What girl?" they asked. We were all bewildered at this point. The rest of us mentioned the girl with medium long hair, who has always stood by the staircase, or by them at any time of day. We assumed they lived together because when the two girls would be cleaning, leaving their doors open, the other girl was always sitting inside their apartment, seemingly just watching and doing nothing. Everyone started to feel uneasy. The two girls were starting to look terrified, continuously telling us there were only two of them in the apartment. They asked us what the third girl looked like. We all gave the same description. Medium length hair, wearing a long sleeve shirt and a long skirt with it. They asked us what her face looked like. None of us could remember her face. Ever since then, none of us saw the girl again. However, this was just the beginning of the encounters with the paranormal in the apartment building. At night, there were reports of people hearing a dragging noise outside of their apartment doors. Something sounded like it was walking around the second floor, dragging something heavy with it. Every time it did, we'd feel a heavy sense of dread. Our cat would always hiss at the door. Sometimes we'd see a woman standing near our beds, looking similar to the girl we used to see by the staircase before. Our cat would jump at it, and it would disappear. Eventually, my then boyfriend and I moved out. We also found out that none of the original tenants stayed after we left. Until now, when I pass by that same building, I still feel a strange sense of dread. Thank you, MJ, for submitting that story. Obviously, Night Drive Paranormal is a fairly new project for me, so I would love to hear if you have any suggestions for the show. As said from the start, I'd like this to be even more interactive than the tape library. So if you have any suggestions for stories you would like me to cover, or ideas that might fit here, then please do get in touch. You can leave me a comment below, or feel free to drop me an email. Let's get into our third story, shall we? Since I was a kid, I have suffered a lot of night terrors, and what I will call hallucinations. Most of them, I would say, does come from an active mind, that when we are children it generally seems more chaotic and terrifying, but others, I'm not sure what they were. I don't like to claim that it could have been ghosts. In all honesty, I don't know. The thing is, my story didn't happen when I was a kid. It happened when I was a teenager, at 14 years old. I need to offer you a gist of how my childhood house used to be. Without that context, it will be harder to understand what's going on in the story. My kitchen was connected to a large dining room, where on one side, its walls were made of glass, offering a view to our garden. The dining room then connected to the living room, and both kitchen and living room connected to 2 bedrooms, plus 2 bathrooms, which belonged to me and my sisters. From the living room you could also access the top floor, where my parents had a large suite bedroom for themselves. When I reached 14 years old, all my older sisters had left the house already, so I lived with my parents alone in quite a big house, and those 2 rooms had become mine. Anyway, I used to leave my school backpack on the kitchen floor by its exit, so that my scrambled egg brain would not forget it in the morning. One night, it was around 11 PM, close to midnight. Me and my mother were alone in the house. My father was working late hours, so I knew my mum would be sleeping already. My parents hated that I walked around the house at late hours, because I usually went to get the phone to talk for hours with my friends, and that really pissed them off. So I usually knew when they were fast asleep and I could move silently around the house. I quietly went from my room to the kitchen, because I had forgotten something in my backpack, and noticed how beautiful the dining room was, with all the moonlight flooding in through the glass walls. That same light illuminated the kitchen enough for me to see where my backpack was, right beside the door that connected to the dining room. So I could definitely see that no one was in the dining room, and that I am absolutely sure of. This event happened in a 1-minute span maximum, though for me it felt much longer. When I reached to grab the strap on my bag, in the corner of my eyes I noticed a female human figure. I say female because it was clearly dressed in a white nightgown, one that looked similar to an old gown that had belonged to my godmother, who had passed away. My brain thought this was my mother, staring at me from the corner of the dining room, even though she never wore a nightgown. I recall grabbing the strap and not turning my head to the figure, and saying out loud, "I'm not taking the phone, I just need the backpack," because my brain thought that my mother had come downstairs and would definitely scold me for how late it was. But the moment I finished that sentence, I realised that is not my mother. I froze while holding the strap and realised someone was breathing behind me. I could hear and feel a warm breath touching my right ear, and I could smell it. It was breathing on top of me and too close to me. I know this is a weird way to describe it, but I don't think I could think of a better way to say it. It smelled like an old person's breath. When I finally snapped out of it, I recall dropping the backpack and proceeding to scream for my mother, while I ran through the kitchen to the hallway that led to my room. I kept screaming from the top of my lungs in absolute panic, while turning the hallway light on. The light illuminated the corridor to my room, but the rest of the house seemed engulfed in darkness. There was nothing. No one was following me at all. Loud stumps from the upper floor echoed through the empty house. My mother was running full speed to the stairs that led into the living room, while shouting non-stop, "What's wrong?" I answered in a very shaky voice, "I'm okay. I'm okay." I know she stopped while she was coming down the stairs and asked once more if I was sure I didn't need help. I replied again a bit more steady, "I'm okay." Now she knew I got weird night terrors. I've always had them, and she has always been a very supportive mother that never called me crazy and fully respected me. So after asking one more time if I needed anything, and me refusing again, she bid me good night, telling me to call her if I needed anything, and went back to her room. Even if I had refused her help, I have to admit that I was in tears, terrified, and was only trying to be strong so that my mother wouldn't be too worried. Nothing was there, so why worry her? But I have never felt, smelled, and seen so clearly an apparition in all my life. This memory is the only one that still scares me today. Side note, I didn't give more details on the apparition mainly because I believe that memories do get corrupted over time. We unconsciously include details that probably weren't there. The only detail I know for sure is the white nightgown, and that it was definitely a woman. I think it had grey hair and weirdly didn't seem too old, but those two details might not be true at all and only a distortion of my mind. Thank you, Matty, for sending that in. So sorry it has taken me so long to get back to most of you. Now this next one is a little strange, but I'm a sucker for stories that just feel totally odd. If you follow the main channel, you'll know I've been deep in the story of Mel's Hole for weeks. So how could I resist a story about cheeseburgers and potential clones? Let's get into story number 4. Hi. I've never done anything like this before, and maybe it's the way I was raised, to always keep these experiences to yourself. I was told people will think you're crazy, and they'll lock you up. Or worse, they'll believe you, and you'll become their next study subject. Awful thing to tell a young child. Anyway, I'll start with one that happened recently that had 2 other witnesses to the events. A bit of backstory. My first child was moving out soon, and with the packing and sorting, we just went a mile up the road to pick up some cheeseburgers for a quick meal so we could keep working. It was dark and the parking lot was illuminated by the tall perimeter lights. There is a tall fence between the restaurant and the adjacent building that runs the entire perimeter. In the drive-thru, a small humanoid figure came out the side door, about 10 feet in front of our vehicle, crossed in front to the sidewalk, and disappeared around the side of the adjacent building. "Mum?" Both kids in shaky voices, pointing out the front windshield. "Look." I hadn't taken my eyes off the windshield, but suddenly noticed the same figure, in the black pants, shoes and black hoodie, with the hood pulled up over their head, and same earphones. Again, coming from the left door. They crossed the lot and again disappeared around the side of the adjacent building. "Maybe they're twins," one of the kids suggested, trying not to freak out. I answered, "Yeah, maybe." Just as I started to relax, another figure. Same build, same height, same clothes, and same headset. Came out the left door and walked in the same direction. I'd had enough. The girl handed us the bag of burgers and I immediately handed it off so we could get the hell out of there. It would have taken a full 15 minutes to walk as far as they'd needed to in order to circle back around, and the whole front of the restaurant is clear glass. We should have been able to see them walk through the restaurant. They continued appearing approximately every 2 minutes. As soon as one disappeared to the right, another appeared to the left, coming through the door. As we were leaving, my older child looked back behind us, and I heard them whimper, "Mum, please hurry." Yep, there was another one coming out. It took us months to go back. What's terrifying is, this very same event happened another few times at different times of day as well. I never saw the being's face despite having a clear view only a few feet away, even in broad daylight. We only talked about it once, and it still freaks us out. I have no idea what to make of this. Twins? Yeah, sure, okay. Triplets? Rare, but maybe. But 4 or 5 of the exact same? No way. They were identical in every way, every mannerism. I'd love to hear if you or anyone else has any idea about what might have happened here. We only have time for one more story tonight, dear listeners. Don't forget I'll be back with more of these every 2 weeks. So if you haven't already, please do click subscribe so you don't miss out. Also, if you have enjoyed this episode and want to support me, you can do that really easily by clicking the like button and leaving me a comment letting me know what you thought of tonight's stories. This is another fairly simple one, but God, it's another one that properly got to me as I read it. I think sometimes the ones that take place in a single incident are all the more spooky. Just this sudden event that makes you question everything you know about the world, before you are just suddenly returned to normal life. Here is our last story. My name is Dan and I'm 33 and from the States. I wanted to share with you a short story from my early teens. A story that to this day gives me the most intense chills. I was 15 at the time and was on a family holiday to Tennessee to visit my cousin Dylan. It was the second day into our 2-week-long stay, and after a long day of running around outside and playing in his pool, we decided it was time to head inside to get some sleep. To get to his room we had to walk up a spiral staircase and walk down a long hallway. I was staying in his room on a couch he had set up against the wall. Once laying down on his couch, you had a clear view of the doorway to his room. Now I should mention this doorway had no door attached, so it was just a clear view into the long hallway. I remember saying goodnight to Dylan and laying my head down on the pillow and pulling up the scratchy old blanket that he had gave me. I was lying down in a way where my feet were pointed towards the open doorway. After around what felt like 20 minutes of just recounting my day and looking around the dark room, I drifted off to sleep. Then I woke up to what clearly felt like someone gently tapping my lower leg to get my attention. I remember jolting my eyes open, but not being too concerned as I was so tired. I closed my eyes again and it almost immediately happened again. 3 distinct taps on my lower leg. This time I shook my leg and sat up, looking down at my leg, and there was nothing there. I looked across the room to Dylan's bed, expecting it to be empty and to find him hiding somewhere in the dark playing a prank on me. To my surprise, I could see through the darkness his outline laying in his bed, and could hear his slow, rhythmic breathing. At this point I was scared and started scanning the dark room, slowly, until my gaze reached the doorway. At the bottom of the doorway, near the floor, I could clearly see an outline of what looked like a head peeking around the doorframe, as if a person was just laying in the hallway, peeking in. The head had no features, and somehow seemed darker than the surrounding darkness. I remember keeping my eyes locked on this figure, tears welling up in my eyes from fear. It never moved, as if it was just staring back at me. I just sat there, looking at this thing, too scared to move. After what seemed like 5 minutes, I flung myself back down on my side, bringing my knees up against my chest and holding the blanket over my face. The tapping on my leg happened one more time that night, but I ignored it and laid awake with my eyes closed tightly. I distinctly remember staying in that position until the sun began to shine into the room. As soon as there was enough light, I slowly slid the blanket down and shifted my gaze towards the doorway near the floor. There was nothing. Not a thing laying in the doorway that could have looked like a head. Nothing. I told my experience to my cousin when he woke, and he didn't believe me. But he did swear he never got up during the night. All in all, that was the only experience I had staying there. But the image of that head peering around the bottom of the doorway has never left me, and always gives me the fattest chills. Thank you for joining me tonight on another late night drive. Again, please do get in touch if you have a story to share. I will be back with another deep dive next week on my main show, The Tape Library. And then we'll be back for another round of paranormal stories in 2 weeks. Until then, get home safe.